I'm Delith James and I'm the Digital Health Ecosystem Wales Programme Lead, and we're hosting today's event. The subject for today's event was actually in response to feedback from lots of people in terms of around what they wanted to see for an event, and we were able to host this. So I'm going to ask you to do something now. We're going to hold a poll right at the beginning of this event and just ask people how confident they currently feel in terms of AI and governance and all the sort of data protection and things. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how confident do you currently feel, with 1 being not confident at all? And pop this into the chat so we can get a sense of how you are, and 10 being really super confident, quite happy to go ahead with all sorts of things around AI and information governance. And we're just really keen to get a sense of where people are on their journey around this. So please do pop it in the chat, just on a scale of 1 to 10. That would be fantastic. Just while I'm giving some housekeeping requests. I can see that I think the majority of people have already done this, just in terms of switching their cameras off and going on silent while other speakers are online. That's absolutely fantastic. So if you can mute yourself when you're not asking questions. We are recording this session. I think you probably have seen note of that. And this will go on YouTube and our website after the event. As I mentioned before, there will be some time at the end for questions and answers, so please do pop these into the chat. And I can see that we're getting some responses just around how confident people are feeling around data protection and IA, and how confident people are feeling. So that's great. Thank you for that. And of course, I will repeat this poll at the end of the session, just so that we can see whether or not there's been any progress made. So that's the housekeeping all out of the way. And I'm going to hand over now to our speakers for today, Ahmed and Alistair from the Information Commissioner's Office, and they're going to talk you through their toolkit. But I'll leave them to introduce themselves, and we'll start with the presentations. Thank you.
Thanks, Del. Hi, everyone. Nice to speak to you today. Thank you to Del and Alan and Alistair for hosting this event and inviting us to speak today. Look forward to talking to you today about our AI and data protection risk toolkit. So as a brief introduction, my name is Alistair. I'm a Senior Policy Officer in the Technology Department at the ICO. Been working in the department for almost 2 years now, focusing on AI policy. Initially came in to support Professor Ruben Binns on the development of some guidance on AI and data protection that you may have seen. And then since he left in sort of last July now, I've been working on this AI risk toolkit. And whilst I share my slides, I'll hand over to Ahmed for a quick introduction.
Thanks, Alistair. So hi, everyone. My name is Ahmed Razik, a Principal Technology Advisor at the ICO. Yeah, joined about a year ago, actually, and I've been working alongside Alistair, who's been leading on this toolkit to deliver this AI and protection toolkit. And yeah, we're excited to speak to you all today.
Thanks, Ahmed. Hopefully you can see my slides. If not, just shout. So very quickly, if you're not aware, so the Information Commissioner's Office is the independent authority set up to uphold information rights in the public interest, promote openness by public bodies and data privacy for individuals. Or as I describe to people who don't know, if you know GDPR, we're those guys. I'm going to start off by giving a bit of background to the risk toolkits. So the ICO has been interested in AI for many years. I think you can trace it back to sort of early 2011 when we published the initial version of the big data machine learning AI and data protection report, which looked at the rise of sort of big data analytics and machine learning to analyze big data sets and the implications it had for data protection. And since then, we've seen more and more applications of AI being developed and deployed, and many of these applications process personal data. We recognize the opportunities that AI can bring to society, more efficiency, better decisions being made, etc. But there are also risks to individuals as well. So risks such as bias and discrimination, opaque processing by complex machine learning or deep learning or things like that. So that's why there was a decision made to start developing an AI auditing framework. And this framework was designed to provide a clear methodology for the ICO to assess the data protection compliance of organizations using artificial intelligence. And the framework has three main outputs. So the first of which is the internal auditing product. So this is a tool that our internal assurance and investigation teams will use when they go out to assess organizations using AI to process personal data. The second product is the guidance on AI and data protection. So this was guidance produced by Professor Ruben Binns, as I mentioned earlier. And this guidance provides best practice as well as how we interpret aspects of the law when it comes to developing AI to process personal data. And then thirdly, and what we're here to talk to you today about, is the AI and Data Protection Risk Toolkit. And this is designed for organizations to help them assess their own compliance with data protection legislation when using AI. And we hope that Toolkit is a practical product that people in both sort of compliance focused roles, but also data science roles can use. So what I mean by compliance focused roles would be job roles such as data protection officers, legal counsel, other people involved in information governance and compliance focused roles. And on the other side, data scientists, so data engineers, those people actually involved in developing and designing and training, testing AI systems. Just a brief look at the timeline of the toolkit. So we have adopted an iterative approach, which means we're trying to publish several different versions before a final version is published. And even beyond that, we'll continue to iterate the toolkit as best practices are developed and other techniques and mitigation strategies are thought of. We'll add these to the toolkit as we go along. So we initially started off with publishing the alpha version of the toolkit back in March 2021. This was the first time that we really showed our thinking on the toolkit to an external audience. And by publishing an early version of this first, it enabled people to provide practical and useful feedback that we use to develop the beta version. The beta version is the version that we'll be talking to you today about, and this was published in July. And so as you can see from this diagram, we're currently in the period in between the beta one being published and the final version being published. And we'd be really interested to hear your thoughts about how we can improve the beta one before the release of the final version later this year.
The beta version is currently out for consultation, so we'll put some links in the chat so that you can hopefully feedback to us.
Thanks. I'm now handing over to you, Ahmed, to talk a bit about the structure of the toolkit.
Yeah, so initially with the alpha version of the toolkit, we really centered it around data protection risks. And we got a lot of feedback to say that it might be more prudent to think about the data protection risks in terms of the AI lifecycle. So we decided to structure the toolkit around the AI lifecycle. Now, you can see a diagram to the right there. We haven't quite followed that lifecycle there, but what we've done is combine a few stages. So we've taken the business and use case development and design phase and grouped them together. The training and testing phase, and then we've kept the deployment and monitoring phases as part of the toolkit. And then there was a really popular, important phase that a lot of people asked for, which was around procurement. Often many organizations probably won't develop their own in-house AI systems, and they'll procure something off the shelf, and that we recognized that they needed to do a lot more work around procurement. So within the beta version, we've added an additional section there. It's we think that by following this toolkit, organizations can have a high confidence that they are complying with data protection legislation. And we're going to go through the structure of the toolkit, and hopefully by the end you'll have a bit more understanding of the toolkit and confidence to apply some of the toolkits in your own contexts.
Thanks. Just to add a bit more about what we mean by we think organizations can have high assurance here. So as I mentioned earlier, another product of the AI auditing framework is the internal tools that our assurance and investigations teams are going to be using when they go out and assess organizations using AI. And we've worked closely with our assurance colleagues to ensure that the product that they're creating maps onto the product that we're publishing. So i.e. the risks and the practical steps that we identify internally are the ones that we've shared externally as well. So if you are an organization and you do follow the toolkit and were subsequently then audited by the ICO, there's a reasonably high chance that you will be able to demonstrate compliance with data protection legislation. So we're now going to move on to the toolkit itself and trying to give a sort of practical demonstration of how the toolkit works. So on your screen here, we've taken a screenshot of a particular risk statement and some practical steps. So what we've done here is we've filtered by the risk domain area fairness. So fairness is one of the key principles within data protection legislation, and within the concept of the fairness principle, we've identified statistical accuracy, bias, and discrimination as considerations organizations should take when thinking about how to comply with the fairness principle. As you can maybe tell, the risk statement are the same across the different life cycle stages. So we think that the risk statements transcend the different life cycle stages. And the practical steps here, we've chosen this particular example because we think that one practical step can sort of apply across the different life cycle stages with appropriate changes. So for example, for this one, we're talking about the risks of inaccurate outputs or discrimination or bias outputs. And we believe one way of mitigating these risks is to, right at the start during your initial business requirements and design phase, to think about, as an organization, what your minimum success criteria could be to proceed to sort of the next stage of the life cycle of your AI system. So for example, what statistical accuracy level would your organization tolerate before moving on to the deployment phase? So for example, would your organization be happy that outputs are 80% correct in terms of identifying the true positives or whatever, or something like that? Or is there a higher barrier that the AI system must reach before deploying it. So we think by documenting this minimum success criteria at the start and tracking this through the different life cycle stages in terms of training and testing and then deploying and monitoring, you can mitigate some of the risks surrounding inaccurate outputs and stuff like that. So that's why during the training and testing, the AI system phase, we've got the practical step again about testing your model to ensure that it meets these minimum success criteria that you documented in the initial business requirement and use case. So hopefully that gives you a small flavour of how the toolkit works and how you can use the toolkit in your particular context to ensure that you're compliant with the different areas of data protection legislation. I'm going to hand over to Ahmed now, who's going to take a deeper dive on one of the practical steps.
Yeah, so we've been really focused in creating this toolkit in looking at, well, trying to make it as practical as possible, and trying to give, making sure that each practical step can be validated, right? So we've got this example here where it says have clear criteria and lines of accountability about the labeling of data involving protected characteristics or special category data. What you might want to consider is, we've given practical steps, so you might want to consider talking with members of the protected characteristics group or the representative about labeling the criteria. And then we've created another set of almost best practices to say that when labeling data, you should create data that's it's very easy to understand, includes descriptions of all possible labels and examples, and covers edge cases. So what we're trying to do there is making sure that if you're an engineer or DPO, you can easily validate the practical steps that we've identified here. And hopefully by carrying out these practical steps, you can clearly demonstrate your compliance with the law. You will be able to mitigate risks associated with, in this case, bias and discrimination. And hopefully, and I know we're speaking in a health context here today, and we've spoken to doctors, and some of the things that they're saying is that they want greater confidence that they're doing the right thing. And we hope that by following the practical steps and the validation methods, you can have greater confidence in the governance processes, which hopefully will ultimately result in a fairer AI system and better outcomes for individuals. Just to add one final thing, we've been working on this toolkit for a fair while now, and we've consulted with many experts across security, bias, or whatever it is, and we're pretty confident that we're quite robust in the terms of each practical step and the validation methods used to used in those steps there. So this has gone through quite an exhaustive consultation. Anything more to add, Alistair?
No, but yeah, just to follow on from that point, more than happy to hear your own experiences of trying to apply these practical steps as well, and whether they are realistic or whether they are too cumbersome. And also, we want to make clear that the practical steps aren't legal requirements, and a lot of them are just sort of best or good practice recommendations for how you can mitigate some of the risks. And we leave open the possibility that you'll be able to find your own ways of complying with the law and being able to demonstrate how you've done that. So it would be interested to hear of any alternative practical steps that you may come across as well. So now I'm going to quickly talk a little bit about the procurement section. So as Ahmed indicated earlier, we're seeing a number of organizations procuring AI systems off the shelf. And this is for several reasons. One, organizations may not have the expertise or resources to invest in developing their own AI systems in-house. And it's therefore cheaper and more cost effective to procure one off the shelf. And yeah, so this is increasing. And on top of that, we're also seeing there being a slight misperception that just because an AI system is available on the market that it is then compliant with the law. And this isn't necessarily the case, and we're particularly seeing that this is not the case in situations where the AI system is developed in a different jurisdiction. So, for example, could have been developed in the US, where it has different jurisdiction in terms of different legislations, and therefore when it is shipped across to the UK and a different legal jurisdiction, there may be compliance issues there. In addition, it is usually the case that in situations where an organization is procuring an AI model, that the organization buying the model will become the data controller. This is usually because the organization buying it will make the decision of how that AI system is going to be used and make decisions about individuals, which makes them the data controller. And as the data controller, they then have the responsibility for complying with the law and being able to demonstrate the compliance with the law. So therefore, it's important for them to carry out the correct sort of due diligence before procuring the AI system to ensure that it is compliant with the law. So to aid organizations to do this, we incorporated this section in the toolkit, which looks at the procurement lifecycle stage. And as you can see there, the risk statement is around inappropriate procurement of AI systems due to a lack of checks and stuff like this. And this can lead to regulatory action, but also just sort of reputational damage as well. And so, yeah, here we have a number of practical steps about what checks that organizations can take before deciding on whether to procure an AI system or not. And there's a number of things that they can ask for in terms of documentation. So whether this is risk assessments, data protection impact assessments, privacy information, security testing, statistical accuracy, etc. And there are other practical steps that we've got in this section as well, just showing this one as a quick demonstration. So hopefully this gives greater confidence for organizations who have elected to procure AI systems. But again, we'd be keen to hear feedback from people actually involved in the procurement of AI systems to understand if we've pitched these practical steps at the right level or whether it's not realistic. So that's a quick tour of the toolkit. Appreciate that there's lots in the toolkit and we could spend a couple hours discussing each sort of risk statement and practical step. But hopefully that provides you a good introduction, and we will pop a link in the chat about where you can find the toolkit so you can take a closer look. And we will also put in our email address, so if you do have feedback or questions that you want to ask separately, you can email us there. In terms of our next steps, as I said earlier, we hope to publish the final version of the toolkit later this year, and we will continue to iterate this toolkit beyond that, as well as new good practice and best practice mitigation and management strategies are thought of. We're really keen to try and test the toolkit on a live application of AI. So what we mean here is it'd be really interesting to work closely with an organization who are involved in a real life application of AI and seeing and using the toolkit as they go along the development stages to see how useful and practical it is for them. And then the goal is, if we can build up a number of these different sort of case studies involving work with organizations, that we could then build up a portfolio that we could publish on our website. Because I think one of the things, one of the feedback, frequent bits of feedback that we receive that we were sort of unable to respond to is that people want to know how other organizations are addressing risks in AI. And at the moment, we don't have this knowledge, but it'd be really good to try and build this knowledge up and share it so people are able to see what other organizations are doing and apply it to their own contexts. And finally, a more strategic goal of ours is we recognise that AI assurance is quite a nascent area at the moment, but there's more and more discussion and debate about how to audit AI systems to ensure that they're compliant with the law, but also that they're ethical and being used appropriately. And we hope that this toolkit provides an important contribution to that discussion and debate, and that we're able to influence and shape the development of AI assurance. Ahmed, anything to add?
I just want to double down on the fact that we'd love to, if any of your organizations are deploying AI live, we'd love to, and you want us to come in and use our toolkit and apply it against your context, we'd be more than happy to do that. I know healthcare is quite a thorny area as well, so this would, I think, provide a really interesting case study. So definitely get in touch if that's something you're interested in. But thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you. And maybe we'll do the other end of the polling at the very end after questions, Del, or do you want to do it now?
No, I think we should. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, so I think we should probably do them first and then see how confident people might feel using the toolkit. So we've got one question from Jonathan. How does the ICO toolkit sit or interact with NHSX tools? DTAC, when DTAC is for an AI digital product, and the buyer's guide to AI in health and care?
Potentially a very good question. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with DTAC, but if you could provide a link, I'd be very interested to read it, because I think one of the things that we want to do before publishing the final version is to look at other toolkits that already exist and to try and make sure that ours complements others and they don't provide sort of contradictory advice and things like that. So I'm afraid I can't give your question a satisfactory answer, but I'm keen to explore it further.
I think it would be good. I'll take that away as well, Jonathan, and maybe respond in an email form. But sorry, I can't give you a live answer to that. I haven't been exposed to that toolkit.
Jeff has placed a really helpful link in the chat as well. The MHRA have a useful guide to determine if your software will be classed as a medical device. Worth you looking at this if you haven't already. This is the link. So that's a great link he shared with everyone there. Has anybody else got any questions? Does anybody want to ask anything? Is anybody keen to sort of test out the toolkit? I suppose that's the sort of next part of our poll, is on a scale of 1 to 10 now, how confident do people feel that they might be around this, if having sight of the toolkit? So on a scale of 1 to 10, I mean, I suppose it's really difficult until people have actually seen more detail around the toolkit. I'm not sure that that confidence will be there until that's happened. And actually, I think what might be really good is to, if you've got case studies of sort of real world testing, if you like, in terms of how this can be implemented, I think that would be really supportive as well. Because one of the reasons and the feedback that we'd received was around when projects are being implemented or piloted, one of the barriers in terms of that implementation process, and something that sort of slowed things down, was around sort of data and information governance, and this whole thing around data protection and having to have lots of things signed off. So I think having a toolkit will really help support in terms of that process and hopefully make that a little bit easier.
Can I add just one minor point, Del?
Of course.
And that we think many of the practical steps that we've put, if you're a data scientist or a DPO or someone that works in legal, these pretty much should be part of your day-to-day work anyway. There's nothing that's we think is politically outrageous or so pioneering that it's impossible to do. So we've really tried to make it something that should be part of people's regular workflow.
I can see a few comments in the chat about people saying how they're involved in AI deployment in their particular context. I'd be interested to hear from them in a more in-depth discussion later on, but as a sort of starter, what are some of the biggest risks that you've identified so far, and is information governance sort of at the forefront of your thinking around risk?
Is anyone happy to come off onto camera and have a chat about that, just in a broad sense?
Del, hi everybody. My name's Ian. I'm our DPO for Life Sciences Hub. So I sit very much in the background. And privacy by design from a data protection officer is the key to everything. There's two areas that we look at: security by design and privacy by design. Once you've got those two theories, then to be honest, the kind of world's your oyster when you're dealing with the projects, especially in artificial intelligence, where you're dealing with special category data, and you need to think about that special category data and also anonymizing it. So there's a whole load of layers there. So from a data protection officer's perspective, being involved right at the beginning of the project with a privacy by design approach will save companies, trusts and health boards time and money. And that, to be honest, for industry is the bottom line. It's the time and money element, but you're also then achieving the requirements of lawful processing. You're considering risks associated with the lawful processing. So I know I'm banging the drum from a DPO's perspective, and I'm sorry, Del, but that is right at the beginning. Once you've got that, like I say, the world's your oyster. Thanks very much, guys.
And if anybody, as they're sort of implementing anything, if anybody does have anything that they want to sort of just run past, just to double check and things, more than happy for you to contact us at DHEW, and we can point you in the right direction, or respond to any queries in that sense, or put you in touch with somebody else. Has anybody else got anything that they'd like to share as well? Any more questions?
I think another question I had is, what sort of areas are you looking to deploy AI in? So people have said that they're looking to pilot an AI solution. Is that in terms of medical diagnoses? Is it more background HR type stuff? I think we're interested to hear the different sort of examples that people are trying to deploy AI in.
So we've got a response there in terms of clinical decision support in cancer MDT meetings. And then Helen's asked, do attendees have a feel for whether AI is already deployed in the NHS in Wales, or is it more something that is about to come in? Is that what people are getting a sense for? Happy to sort of have that conversation. I suppose the other thing, given that we did the poll right at the beginning, just in terms of how confident people feel, and people were really appreciate your honesty, and that confidence was relatively low. Is there anything that we could do in terms of following up around this, if we were to host some more sort of sessions around anything? Is there anything in particular that would help in terms of, you know, giving you that confidence to do this work? And Robert's put that he has several AI projects up and running in Cwm Taf Morgannwg Health Board, so it might be great to hear around how those have gone and how you felt the information governance has worked for you. But it feels very quiet, no conversations going. Is everybody thinking that they might get some time back in their calendars today? I don't want to cut us off short at all.
I will share the email address now as well, in case people do want to email separately. I know we've had a few people saying they're happy to have a follow-up chat, which would be useful from our end.
Brilliant. Just looking through some further comments. Helen's very helpfully added, just in terms of Rob, who might have joined after, but just restating that Ahmed and Alistair are looking for pilot studies. Jonathan's added that NHS Digital have an AI assurance training day, which has some useful thoughts, which in general are enough to be of use in Wales and England, primary and secondary care. Robert's added that pilot studies in AI starting with Respiratory Innovation Wales. So all useful stuff. More than happy for people to come off mute and add if they want to sort of engage in discussion. You don't have to put it on the chat side now. It would be lovely to hear from somebody. Hi, Robert.
Hi. Yeah, just saying, Cymorth, we've been using AI for quite some time now. We're doing a lot with NVIDIA through our Imaging Academy, which is doing image diagnosis using AI. That's now going to commercial product. We've got the Kerry chatbot, which is a future generation of the old Rita and Alwyn chatbots. Which has come through Belinda and Cymorth. The Kerry chatbot is taking about 1,500 calls a week, handling all our COVID queries and COVID information. That Kerry chatbot is now going into a new iteration. It's been transferred to Respiratory Innovation Wales to host it, and we're partnering that now with the Tritech Institute in West Wales. So it's been put into the long COVID app. So that the long COVID app, as well as providing set information from the health board, will also have the chat function of AI using the IBM Dr. Watson. It is. So we're using that engine in the AI, and we've also been using AI to understand our RFID tracking movements around the hospital. So we looked at using AI to understand patient flow into A&E and whether or not we needed to increase equipment capacity into A&E rapidly to cope with patient level changes. So that was quite an interesting AI project. My other hat, I consult for Respiratory Innovation Wales, and we've got a thermal AI project, which we're just starting to put into research stages. It's using the AI software that called Picture This, which is plant identification software. So we've partnered with the company that designed that software, and we're going to be using that to analyze respiratory conditions using thermal imaging. So that company is quite successful. They've got a large oncology division doing very extensive research over in Canada. For oncology, so we're quite excited to bring that in as a respiratory disease detector. So there's a lot of AI going on in between Cymorth now and Respiratory Innovation Wales, and we're bringing Hywel Dda Tritech Institute into the group to be an AI partner.
It's all very exciting. I've got to say, I think the health sector has probably got the most, for me, the most interesting opportunities of using AI. I think if you compare it to other applications that have been like social media or retail, where it's just trying to get people to buy more stuff, you're always a bit like, is that the best use of AI? But I think some of the applications in health are really, really promising and hopefully can make a big difference for individuals.
One of the projects we're looking at in Rescue Innovation Wales is actually, it's not health related, it's actually our own internal management related. So we're looking at a system, Genesa AI, which is a Spanish company, that will actually trawl all our emails, all our document archives, all those little hidden things where you forgot where you store a document that everybody needs to know about, but you don't know where on your PC you've stored it anymore. So this system will scrape our corporate IT infrastructure, analyze all the documents, start storing them correctly in accessible sort of locations for everybody. So it brings that information that you've got on your PC that you don't realize who else needs to know about it. It makes it available to everybody else. So it brings that. And then what we intend to do that with the platform then is that AI platform, when we start looking at new projects, it will go out, it will scrub public med, it will scrub social media and all the academics to actually tell us who else is working in this area and what the innovation opportunities are. And we actually believe that the Genesa system that we're trialing at the moment will actually start filtering out genuine innovation from just improvement. So we stick with our remit of being an innovative company. So there's lots of AI that can sit in the background of institutions to improve how they internally communicate, which most companies I've worked for have always said that the workers are disgruntled with internal communications and never knowing what's going on. And there's some exciting AI now that's changing that.
Yeah, sounds really good.
That sounds
the ICO could do something similar.
Yeah, I'm thinking I might have a chat with you offline, Robert, just to find out a little bit more about that. That sounds really interesting. Thank you for sharing that. Jonathan, you've got your hand up. Did you want to ask a question?
It was really a comment to say, I think one of the difficulties for people implementing this is that an awful lot of products that claim to have AI are not AI. They're overselling. There's lots of studies that over 60% of products that claim to have AI do not have AI. And of the 40%, a lot of them aren't using AI for what you're doing in that moment. They're using it for their future sort of data mining, data harvesting for product 1.2. And so I think it's just a word really to everyone, just say, you know, you need to be very clear with whoever you're buying it off. What's the AI and what's it doing? Because maybe you don't need the AI toolkit because actually it's just a straightforward algorithmic thing that's not making any decisions. So you may, before you do work, you don't need to because you believe the company's hype, I think is, you know, there's actually not that many genuine uses of AI out there right at this moment. I think they're coming very, very quickly. But, you know, as I sit here today, and I agree with Robert, you know, if I was in charge of a provider right now, I'd be getting AI in the back office because the barrier to implementation is far lower than it is for true clinical decision supporter at that front end. I mean, you know, to have an AI that can go, this blood test is normal or this X-ray is normal is a far lower threshold than for it to be generating decisions from a multitude of things. So I think it was more a comment around when I look at grants coming in for AI and stuff, a lot of people seem to be shooting for the stars when actually there's some huge gains to be made with slightly less sexy stuff, but will liberate thousands of hours of clinician, nurse, admin time that can be better repurposed, I think.
Yeah, thanks. Interesting comment. I probably agree with you that there probably is a lot of hype around the use of the word AI. I think one point we would make here is that although it's called the AI and Data Protection Risk Toolkit, it doesn't necessarily mean you have to be using AI to be able to find some of the practical steps useful. And indeed, there's nothing in data protection legislation that is specific to AI applications. And as you sort of indicated, there are some rules around automated decision makings and which could apply to AI, but also to other algorithmic based systems and stuff like that. So we're hoping that even if the application you're thinking of using doesn't technically use AI, however you want to define it, there may still be aspects in it that will be useful for the type of processing that you've got in mind.
Robert, do you want to come in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, but in relation to sort of Jonathan's comment about the correct application or correct interpretation of AI, one of my experiences that I share about AI is that people also actually overestimate what AI actually is. At a simple level, with if you load a 300,000-400,000 data sets into an AI engine like IBM or something, what you get out is just a glorified Excel spreadsheet. You could probably get one of your pivot table experts to produce better. And that is genuine AI. But it's only when you start pushing it down through through machine learning, you get automation. And that's kind of where most people want to play, is the automation. Is the conversation we're having in Rescue Innovation Wales is whether or not we turn on the unsupervised deep learning for the Kerry chatbot. And we know when we turn on that function, it will start analyzing all the Reddit conspiracy theories. It will go out there and it will find, and we are generally terrified of what it will find, and we can't control it. And so that's kind of where the barriers are, that everybody assumes AI means deep learning, which is how people beat the Go game. But in reality, all we're doing is very, very controlled, safe, supervised machine learning. And but if at its top level, AI is just a glorified spreadsheet.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to contribute? Anybody else with hands up or any questions? No? Well, I'll get our contact details up. So if people do want to get in touch, we've got our social media and we've got our email address. Please do, if you think of any questions, I can send them over to the guys and get some responses. As I mentioned at the beginning, this has been recorded, so it will be on the website and on YouTube. And if you think of anything that you think would be particularly useful to follow this up with, please do get in touch and let us know. But otherwise, I'm going to give you 10 minutes back for your afternoon. And thank you so much, and thank you for everybody contributing. And I hope people feel that the toolkit really will help in terms of that confidence building around this topic. So thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Delith. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
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 Bye.